Hello, fellow thinkers. Welcome to the third episode of the Independent Minds podcast. Today, we will discuss ancient Greek philosophy as we promised last week. So, Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ner. How are you?
I'm doing fine. And yeah, today, as you know, our topic is ancient Greek philosophy. I'm very excited about this topic because, well, Greek philosophy is generally seen as the cradle of Western philosophy as a whole, and, even our civilization. So, Brandon, what do you think about Greek philosophy?
Well, I think Greek philosophy is amazing because of all of the influence it's had on, for example, all of philosophy and all of civilization, basically. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. So, you before we started this podcast, you mentioned to me that you wanted to talk about Thales. So, do you want to talk about him?
Yeah, so Thales was the first Greek philosopher. He was before Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. And what he did was he was basically like the guy who stopped thinking that whenever there was lightning and thunder, that it was Zeus getting mad. He was the one who stopped thinking like that and started thinking more like a philosopher, more like we might think about like mechanisms that might cause that to happen and forming like a more coherent explanation of things, right? And that's why like he's regarded as the first of like the Greek philosophers.
Wow, very influential guy, to say the least. So, as many people know, there are three main Greek philosophers regarded as the first true Western philosophers. Those are, well, Socrates was the teacher of Plato, and Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. So they're all kind of related that way. Um, they all influence the way we think today. They held the standard of individualism against, well, against the belief of the masses. And, as we all know, Socrates was actually killed in his, well, at that time, he was living in Athens, and the Athenian government decided to execute him because he was supposedly poisoning the youth of Athens. So we can see so many things that are similar today. Many thinkers and philosophers are still persecuted and discriminated and even killed in some parts of the world. And it is important that we realize it was nothing new. It all began as, well, Western philosophy began. So, what do you think about this, Brandon?
I think it shows like how important he was that the Athenian government would kill him. That just
Mhm.
shows like how much of like a game changer he was.
Yes, exactly. He was a really influential figure because, as we as we know, he was the reason Plato started philosophizing, and he had this notion of government. So, as we all know, he had this notion of government, which he expressed by writing Plato's Republic. he mentioned how the idea of philosopher kings were a great substitute to, well, not a substitute, a great solution to many of the problems faced by humans to this day. And, well, he is overall seen as a very influential figure, and many of his ideas actually came from his mentor. And who is that? That's Socrates. And if you want, we could explore Socrates a little bit more. Would you like to
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
So Socrates, we know him as the founder of uh, Socratic method. The Socratic method. He was very he questioned everything, and that was the main reason he attracted so many attention from people. Today, we see many philosophers and thinkers who are questioning every single moral belief, authoritarian figure, and that just leads to more and more conflicts. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I guess.
And I believe that was the main reason why he was so significant. He essentially made us question ourselves and those around us, the system around us.
Yeah, definitely. And that's influenced so many, well, it directly influenced people like Plato, but it's kind of indirectly influenced people like us because we are like kind of very much influenced by a culture of like not not accepting anything at face value and kind of like asking questions. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I agree. We're surrounded by mystery in a way. We must question it in order to understand. And I feel like that was the reason why we value him to this day.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Brandon, we covered how why Socrates was very influential in Western philosophy. Now, if you want, let's move on to another very influential philosopher, and that is, as you guessed it, Plato. So, would you like to talk about his ideas for a bit?
Of course. Of course. So Plato was the student of Socrates, and like Plato wrote a lot. One of the most important books he wrote about was called The Republic. And I have not read The Republic myself, but I think you have, Nur. So would you like to talk about that?
Yes, I have read The Republic. Um, to summarize it, he basically believes that humans are ignorant when they're left without any ideals. And he argues for a system in which philosopher kings rule. And those people are supposed to be very well educated. And, well, they're supposed to be both philosophers, they're very intelligent, they know they know how their natural not the natural rights of humans work, what is socially acceptable and what is not, and they're seen as this fit rulers. And I feel like, in a way, that is a very controversial idea because, you know, one philosopher king could, if something were to go wrong in his life, that would affect the whole nation, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
So that's basically we're expecting a person to be perfect in every single way. And essentially to be intelligent, rule fairly, and all of these very important titles bestowed upon one person only. How are we to know that that person is perfect? Is there even a perfect person?
exactly. Like something that a point that kind of comes to my mind when I think about this is Plato thinks about like how humans have so many flaws and then expects a human to have no flaws. He expects two
Yeah.
people to have no flaws to solve the problem of humans having so many flaws. And that's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yes, that is ironic, but um I think this ties into the ideas of Thomas Hobbes, who believed that there should be one absolute ruler to govern the people. And that was also a very influential idea because there are Thomas Hobbes's, I guess, like I don't like to use the word rival, but it kind of seems like it. Main rival, quote unquote, was in fact John Locke. We describe as a very liberal guy to, in his day. So um you know, we see the ideas of these philosophers moving on centuries forward and, finding these people who are also very influential in history.
Yeah, like what's interesting is Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, they were both English guys, I'm pretty sure.
Yes, they were both English.
And like Thomas Hobbes was kind of influenced into his views because he had the same views as Plato about human nature, which was basically that like we have so many flaws and that we need to like have like good ruling to in order to thrive. And his this was kind of as a result of the experiences that he witnessed
Hmm.
because he witnessed, I think, the English Civil War. But then,
And do you know which king was executed?
no, which king?
That was Charles the First. He saw the king basically having his head cut off. And that must
Oh,
have been pretty shocking to a person that at that time. And what I think was also, so you mentioned how he expects one person to rule over the people perfectly, right? I feel like in Leviathan, he doesn't really talk about that. In fact, Leviathan is interpreted like very in a variety by many philosophers because, well, it doesn't exactly say like, oh, government should do this, government should do that. It's basically a story. It's not. It's fiction, and
oh,
basically, I believe what he means by that is that he doesn't expect one ruler to be perfect. He even expects him to be cruel in some way so that people would behave. So basically, he wants an overlord ruling over the people with an iron fist. He believes that will be the way in which society will be able to progress further on. So, uh, since I mentioned all these facts about Thomas Hobbes, would you like to talk about John Locke?
yeah. So John Locke is kind of known as the father of liberalism, which is something that you kind of touched on earlier. And he was a very constitutional monarch guy, as opposed to Thomas Hobbes being a kind of just absolute monarch guy, because he thought that he had like a more optimistic view of humans, and he thought that, like, for example, he believed in a theory of the mind called tabula rasa. Now, this means blank slate. And he basically thought that like human beings were kind of blank slates, and that this meant that we weren't inherently screwed, and that like cool stuff could be possible to happen, and that we could be allowed some liberties and freedoms. And then like this kind of I don't, this kind of is like a rejection of Thomas Hobbes, basically.
Hmm.
But it's, even though he does not share like the views of Plato, he was still obviously like influenced by him, just because of like how important Plato has been as a figure in history. But now I think we should discuss like the last three, the last guy in the big three, which was Aristotle.
Well, since we had already mentioned about John Locke, I would like to add one more thing. His idea of natural rights basically was the main founding principle of the US Declaration of Independence. And that was, he believed that people were, they were reasonable and they were not immoral, in fact. And he mentioned that, the natural rights, life, liberty, and property, those were rights that the government had no control upon in a person. So it could not control your right to life and your liberties and your properties, and in a way that was, I felt like um that was kind of the aim of Thomas Hobbes, because he mentioned how people would fight so desperately for in order to get what they want. And it was basically an environment of chaos unless there was someone to rule over them. Yeah, would you like to add something?
Yes, I remember learning about this in history class, and we had a quiz about this, I think. And it was like an it was a state of like universal war, what he believed would like happen, because he thought that human beings, he completely differed from Locke, and he thought that human beings would kind of like clash in an unstoppable way, like it was a necessary thing to happen.
In a way, that was what John Locke was talking about. Life, liberty, and property. That was the thing. So, like, the government needed to protect your life, your, liberties, and your properties and stuff. So, in a way, he was kind of like he was thinking more advanced than what Hobbes thought. And also, along with him, you also mentioned the idea of how human beings were created as, very moral and reasonable beings, and then they went on to be bad. That was basically another idea of Rousseau, who believed that society made them bad. And Rousseau, although many people don't acknowledge it, I remember learning about how he was kind of like an early socialist, no, a Christian socialist. And that, I feel like that is why he is so influential, because he put out these ideas that were so radical at the time.
Yeah, like Rousseau, he's had so much influence on history, just from, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the French Revolution was kind of inspired by him or his
Yes,
writings.
we
And
were inspired by John Locke and they were inspired by Rousseau.
that kind of shows like the differences in how like the revolutions turned out, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
because while Thomas Jefferson was a big fan of John Locke, the fans of Rousseau over there didn't do so well, you know?
Well, in the beginning, I would say that they did fine overall, I would
I
say.
think in the first stage of the revolution, yes, but then after that,
Well, I'd like to discuss this topic later on because, um, frankly, I'd like to do like a full podcast episode on Napoleon because I just would like to talk about him so much. He's such an interesting guy, and there, I will provide like my side of the argument for him and why he was good. And so let me just give a preview in that case here. So, uh, I believe that Napoleon, the Napoleonic stage in during the French Revolution was the most influential, or like post French Revolution, because well, I don't think the French people ever wanted so much, you know, freedom of speech, or a government in which every man could be represented. In the end, the reason that they revolted in the end was because of the terrible economy, and that they were literally hungry, and they were paying so much taxes every single day, and no one did anything about it. It was like a feudal system in the farms, and in the city it was just as worse, if not even worse. So um I feel like Napoleon gave people what they wanted, which was bread. He even allowed, like, newspapers to run, in which it wasn't allowed during Louis's time, and also Louis the 16th. And also, he did a lot of good for France, as in the end, even though he's not liked by other European countries, in which I can understand that fully, why they would hate him. And he started like all these wars when he didn't really have to. But in the end, did he achieve his goal of bringing, there was no war on French soil ever under Napoleon. Like, and there was no country for about a decade that could threaten France. And also, like, people weren't being drafted every single day. And that, there was bread, and there was even like schools made for lower income kids and
lycées.
lycees, yeah. And very interesting stuff.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah,
completely agree. And now I think we should kind of round it up with like
you're right.
Aristotle.
This was just a preview. You'll talk about it later on in another episode. Um, so finally, who did we have, Brandon? We went over Socrates and Plato, and now we have,
Aristotle,
yes,
the last of the big
Aristotle.
three.
Yes, Aristotle was such a great philosopher, because his ways of thinking about government were just so, let's say, ahead of his time, to be honest. So, yeah, would you like to say some things about him?
Yeah, so Aristotle is probably my favorite out of all three of them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure who out of the three, this would be an interesting idea to do a podcast on who was the most impactful, but
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, I think he's a like really interesting, really smart, great guy. But what do you think about his views on government, Nur?
His views on government were, he basically put out an idea in which I cannot argue against ever. He said that human beings are made to live within a government. Otherwise, it would just be purely chaos. And I felt I feel like that was a very true statement from him. I fully agree with that. And he he talks about how people could be educated enough to kind of understand democracy and eventually how they could transform from the idea of the allegory of the cave in which they're just led by the people behind them. And I felt like that still applies to this day, I would say.
It's interesting because we have a public school system, but um, I don't. Here's the thing, because the the issues that affect our government today are obviously completely different from like current events in ancient Greece. But there's gonna be
Hmm.
like some things that always kind of some issues that always kind of like occur
What do you think those
forever.
are?
I like economics basically, because
Yeah, you're right.
that's always a thing.
You're right. Economics is like always a thing, and it will always be a thing, I would say. Do you know why?
The humans have unlimited desires, but there's only limited resources to fulfill those desires.
Exactly. I believe you mentioned this last podcast also, and I wanted to get into it like today. So, would you like to explore that subject a bit more, just a bit more?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so that's what's called the central economic problem, I think. Yeah, yeah. The central economic problem. And then this doesn't have to turn into an econ course, but basically, this means that scarcity is a thing. And this means that like there's going to be competition over resources. And this is and like from there, like people have to make choices over like how they're going to be satisfied using limited resources, which means we have to sacrifice some options to like attain others. And this gives rise to the entire need for an economy to distribute resources. This gives rise for economics. This is very influential.
Hmm. Well, he also that economics is like very important, and to be honest, it's not only about the central economics problem, but it is also about how humans humans are happy when they're not hungry. You get what I'm saying? So that that's how I like to think about it.
That's an eternal truth.
Humans are happy when in today's age you'll we don't worry so much about hunger, especially in America. But do you know what we worry about? We worry about having the not having the latest car,
Yeah.
not having the latest iPad.
First world
You know,
problems.
yeah. As time goes on, the problems changes. So
Yeah.
that.
Like in the ancient Greek age, they just became like, oh, our problem is to not get eaten by a lion.
See,
And then maybe we can like plant wheat and start like cities and stuff. But like,
well, yeah,
yeah, so it's kind of interesting to think about what it'll be in the future.
yes, and Um, you know, since I'm from Turkey, I'll just give you like a quick fun fact. There used to be lions in Turkey. I don't know if you knew that. There used to be like lions in Turkey, but um like they were hunted down eventually over thousands of years. So you
Oh,
know.
that's cool.
Okay, everyone. I believe I lagged for a second. I'm sorry about that, but we were just about to wrap it up, and I asked Brendan whether he wanted to add something.
Um, no, I agree with you. Like we kind of covered every topic we wanted to cover.
So, that's it for this week's podcast episode. We're sorry last week we weren't able to upload. Uh, we're trying to fix the schedule, but we are also are in school and we have some problems with that. But we are doing good, I believe. So, anyways, guys, it's very nice to hear your comments and read them. So please leave a comment below, and like the video and subscribe. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you.
Goodbye.